My father said it at the dinner table, loud enough for the whole restaurant to hear. 12 years, he said, setting down his wine glass like he was closing a case file. 12 years, and what do you have to show for it? A badge and a pension plan. My sister laughed. Not a mean laugh, exactly. More like the kind you do when you're uncomfortable and don't know what else to do. She was the reason we were all there. Her name was on the invitation, her photo on the centerpiece, her acceptance letter from Wharton, framed and propped against the breadbasket like a trophy. I was 31 years old. I had spent the last decade as a federal investigator for the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. I had worked cases involving offshore shell companies, fake charities, wire fraud schemes that spanned 4 states. I had testified before a grand jury twice. I had a commendation letter signed by the special agent in charge of the Chicago field office, sitting in a drawer at home that I had never shown anyone, because who would care? Not my father. Not at this table. She could have gone to law school, my mother said to no one in particular, the way she always did when she wanted to say something to me without saying it to me. She had the scores. I picked up my water glass. I did not say anything. This was how it always went when I came home to Naperville. The house I grew up in was a colonial on a quiet cul-de-sac, the kind of neighborhood where the lawns are always edged and the driveways always sealed, and nobody talks about money, even though money is the only thing anyone is actually thinking about. My father had built a financial advisory firm from nothing, or so the story went. Callahan Wealth Partners. It was on a billboard on I-88. He coached Little League until I was 10. He was the kind of man who remembered your birthday but forgot to ask how you were doing. My sister was getting her MBA. She was 26, beautiful in the specific way our mother had always wanted one of her daughters to be, and she was being sent off to Philadelphia with a down payment on a condo that my parents called a head start, and I called what it actually was. I called it $60,000. I know because I had transferred the same amount from my own savings account 8 years ago when my parents said they needed it. A bridge loan, my father said, just until the market settles. We'll pay you back with interest. I was 23. I believed him. To Serena, my father said, raising his glass, who actually did something with her life. Everyone at the table raised their glasses. My aunt, my uncle, my mother, my sister's boyfriend, whose name I could never remember. They all smiled at each other over the rims, warm and easy, and I sat there with my water glass halfway in the air and thought, I am going to find out exactly how much money is missing. I had been thinking about it for a long time before that dinner, not obsessively. I wasn't the kind of person who spent her evenings building spreadsheets about her own family's finances. I was a federal investigator. I built spreadsheets about other people's families. But there were things I had noticed over the years, small things that I filed away the way you do when you're trained to notice small things. My father's firm had been restructuring for 4 years. The offices had moved twice, from a suite downtown to a smaller space in a strip mall in Lisle, then to what was essentially a converted house in Downers Grove. The website looked like it hadn't been updated since 2019. His business partner, a man named Gerald Finch, who had been at every family Christmas for 15 years, stopped coming around after 2021. When I asked my mother why, she changed the subject. The $60,000 had never been repaid. When I brought it up 2 years after the loan, my father told me the timing wasn't right. When I brought it up again 4 years later, my mother told me I was being materialistic. After that, I stopped bringing it up. And then there was the thing I found by accident, 8 months before Serena's going away dinner, while I was helping my mother sort through some papers after her accountant called about a discrepancy on her personal return. There was a brokerage account in my name that I had never opened. I didn't say anything that night. I helped my mother put the papers back in the filing box, and I drove the 40 minutes back to my apartment in Lincoln Park, and I sat at my kitchen table for a long time looking at the account number written on the back of my hand where I'd copied it down when she wasn't looking. The account had been opened 11 years ago. I was 20 years old. I had been a sophomore at U of I. Whatever was in it, I had not put it there. I did not open a case file on my own father. That was not how it worked, and I was not going to be the person who crossed that line without knowing what was on the other side. What I did was call a friend. Her name was Tamsin, and she was a forensic accountant I had worked with on a wire fraud case in 2020 who had subsequently left the government to start her own private practice in Oak Park. She was 44 years old, wore reading glasses she was always losing, and had a memory for financial irregularities, the way some people have a memory for song lyrics. I drove to her office on a Tuesday afternoon, and I put the account number on her desk, and I told her I needed to know what it was. She looked at the number. She looked at me. "This is personal," she said. "Yes." "How personal?" she said. "Yes, how personal?" "Very." She put her glasses on. "Give me a week." She gave me 10 days, and what she found was not what I had been prepared for. The account in my name was a brokerage account at a firm called Redwood Capital Advisors, which turned out to be a subsidiary of a larger holding company registered in Delaware, which itself was a shell that my father had set up in 2013 through a registered agent in Wilmington. The account had been used as a pass-through for client funds. Money moved from Callahan Wealth Partners clients into what appeared to be a legitimate investment vehicle, held briefly, and then redistributed into a series of other accounts that Tamsin was still tracing. The account was in my name and my social security number. The total amount that had moved through it over 11 years was a little over $4 million. I sat in Tamsin's office for a long time after she told me this. She had a window that looked out onto a parking lot, and there was a silver Honda Civic with a faded Cubs bumper sticker parked directly in my line of sight. And I stared at it while I processed what she had said. $4 million. My name. My social. How exposed am I? I asked. Right now? Technically, as the account holder of record, you're on every wire transfer. She folded her hands on her desk. If someone at the IRS pulls this thread without knowing the history, they're going to start with you. I had spent 10 years building a career around not being the person whose name appeared on fraudulent accounts. I had a commendation letter. I had testified before a grand jury. I had colleagues who trusted me, supervisors who had written me recommendations, a professional reputation that I had constructed carefully and deliberately out of nothing but work. And my father had put it all on the table without asking me. I did not call him. I want to be clear about that. I did not call him, and I did not drive to Naperville. And I did not sit across from him at the kitchen table where I had done my homework for 12 years and ask him to explain himself. I had learned, by the time I was 31, that certain conversations do not produce information. They produce performance. My father was very good at performance. Instead, I called my attorney. Her name was Roxanne, and she was a former federal prosecutor who now specialized in white-collar defense and had an office in the Loop that cost more per square foot than my entire apartment. I had referred clients to her once or twice. She knew what I did for a living. She listened to everything I told her without interrupting. When I was done, she was quiet for a moment. "Do you want to protect yourself, or do you want to pursue this?" she asked. "Both," I said. "Those aren't mutually exclusive," she said. "But the order matters." We spent the next 3 weeks building what Roxanne called a protective record. Every document I had copied, every account number, every wire transfer Tamsin had traced, we organized it chronologically, with a written narrative explaining my complete lack of knowledge or participation. We prepared a voluntary disclosure package. We documented the $60,000 loan, the lack of repayment, and the pattern of financial control my father had exercised over the family for decades. And then Roxanne did something I hadn't expected. She called a contact she had at the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Northern District of Illinois. "We're not waiting for them to find us," she told me. "We're going to them first." I did not tell my mother. I did not tell my sister. I did not tell anyone in my family that I had spent 4 months building a case file that would eventually result in a federal grand jury subpoena served to my father at his office in Downers Grove on a Wednesday morning in March. I was at work when it happened. I was sitting at my desk reviewing documentation on an unrelated case when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. It was my father. He had used the receptionist's phone because he didn't want to call from his own. "You did this," he said. I had thought about this moment many times. I had imagined being cold, being clinical, being exactly as measured and professional as I was in every grand jury proceeding I had ever participated in. Instead, what I said was, "You used my name." There was a pause. It was a business structure, You used my social security number on a fraudulent account that moved $4 million in client funds. I was 20 years old. Another pause, longer this time. Your mother doesn't know about this. I know, I said. That's going to be a difficult conversation. I hung up. My mother called me 40 minutes later. She was not crying. That surprised me. I had expected tears or screaming or some combination of the two. Instead, she was very quiet in the way she got when she was trying to think faster than her emotions. Is this really necessary? She asked. And I felt something move through me. Not anger, exactly. Something more like grief. Because I knew what she was really asking. She was asking whether I was willing to trade my father's freedom for my own, and whether the math of that made sense to her, and the answer was that it did not, and it never would, and she was going to spend the rest of her life not quite forgiving me for being the one who held the correct information. He put my name on it, Mom, I said. He made me part of it without my knowledge. I had to report it. You could have talked to him first. I did. Every time I asked about the $60,000, you told me I was being materialistic. She didn't say anything to that. I stayed on the phone for another few minutes. We said nothing important. After we hung up, I went to the kitchen and made coffee and stood at my window looking out at the alley below my building and thought about the thing nobody in my family had ever been willing to say out loud, that my father had built his reputation on other people's trust, and that at some point the trust had become something he felt entitled to take. The federal case moved slowly, the way federal cases always do. There were depositions, document productions, a second subpoena served to the holding company in Delaware. Gerald Finch, the former business partner who had disappeared from Christmas dinners in 2021, agreed to cooperate with investigators. It turned out he had been aware of the account structure and had raised concerns that my father had not acted on. He had left the firm rather than be part of it, and he had kept records. He was the reason it held together. My voluntary disclosure was accepted. Roxanne and I sat through 2 meetings with the U.S. Attorney's Office, where I answered every question they asked and provided every document they requested, and at the end of the second meeting, the lead prosecutor told me that my cooperation was noted and that I was not a target of the investigation. I nodded. I said thank you. I drove home. I did not feel relieved, exactly. I felt like a person who has been carrying a weight they didn't know was there and has finally been allowed to set it down. There was a soreness to it, the kind you feel in your shoulders after you've been tense for a long time without realizing it. Serena called me a month later. She was in Philadelphia by then, settled into the condo my parents had funded, starting her program at Wharton. She called from a coffee shop. I could hear espresso machines and background conversation. I need to understand what happened, she said. I told her. All of it. The account, the amount, the timeline, the voluntary disclosure. I told her about the $60,000, about the loan that had never been repaid, about the way our parents had handled it when I tried to bring it up. I told her what it felt like to find your own social security number on a fraudulent financial document. I tried to tell her without drama, without editorializing, the way I had been trained to present facts. She was quiet for a long time. Why didn't you tell me sooner? She asked. Because I didn't know what I was looking at yet, and because I needed to protect myself before I could protect anyone else. I feel like my whole life is... She stopped. Started again. The condo. The down payment. I don't know where that money came from, I said honestly. That's something you'll need to ask your attorney about. There was a long pause. I don't have an attorney, she said. You do now, I said. I'll send you Roxanne's number. My father pleaded guilty 14 months after the grand jury subpoena. Wire fraud, conspiracy to commit money laundering, investment advisor fraud. The sentencing guidelines, Roxanne told me, pointed towards 7 to 9 years. His attorney was negotiating for less based on cooperation and age. He was 64, but the restitution figure was not negotiable. The clients whose money had moved through those accounts were going to be made whole, or as whole as possible. The firm was dissolved. The billboard on I-88 came down. The house in Naperville went on the market. I was not at the sentencing hearing. Roxanne offered to accompany me, and I thought about it for a long time. In the end, I decided that I did not need to be in that room. I had already said everything I needed to say in the 2 meetings with the U.S. Attorney's Office, in the documents I had provided, and the moment I had told my father, "You used my name." That was the sentence that mattered to me. Everything else was paperwork. What people don't understand about this kind of thing, and I didn't fully understand it myself until I was on the other side of it, is that the hardest part isn't the legal process. Federal cases are procedural. There are rules, timelines, defined outcomes. You know what you're doing and why. The hardest part is the dinner table. It's the Christmases that don't happen anymore. It's the group text that goes quiet. It's calling your mother on her birthday and having a conversation that is perfectly polite and completely hollow. Because the only thing you could talk about honestly is the thing neither of you can talk about at all. My aunt stopped speaking to me for 8 months. She sent me an email. She was 61 years old, and she sent an email telling me that I had destroyed the family for money. I read it once and did not respond. What I wanted to write back was, "He destroyed it." I just told the truth about what it looked like. I didn't write that. I let it sit. Serena and I are okay. Better than okay, actually. She finished her first year at Wharton and came back to Chicago for the summer, and we had dinner at a Thai place in Wicker Park and talked for 3 hours. She asked me hard questions about why I had waited as long as I did, and I answered them honestly. And she sat with the answers for a while and said she understood, even if she was still angry at the situation. That felt like the right place to land. She got a part-time job. She is paying for the second year of her program herself, which is hard, and she is doing it anyway. I am proud of her for that in a way I am not sure I know how to say. My commendation letter is still in the drawer. I never put it on the wall, partly because I was never much for putting things on walls, and partly because the achievement it represents feels different to me now than it did when I received it. Not smaller, but more complicated. I know what it cost. I know what it sits next to. Last spring, I was promoted to supervisory special agent. My boss gave me a handshake and said something about integrity that I am pretty sure was a prepared remark, and I said thank you and I went back to my desk. That evening, I drove out to Naperville for the first time in almost 2 years. Not to the house. It had already sold. I drove past the old neighborhood, past the edged lawns and the sealed driveways, and kept going until I was on I-88 heading back toward the city. And I looked up at the place where the billboard had been. There was a new one there. An ad for a law firm. I didn't look long enough to read the name. I merged back into traffic and turned the radio up. And I drove home with the windows down even though it was cold, and I thought about the fact that my name was mine again. All the way through, nothing attached to it that I hadn't put there myself. And that felt like enough. For now it felt like more than enough.